Ag PhD full episodes and more are now available on Acres TV, the newest ag platform connecting you to fields of information. Look for us on watchacrestv.com.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to discuss the difference between warm season and cool season grasses.
Let's just start with a typical yard. When we look at a yard, you think, okay, it looks like it's kind of one type of grass out there, but it very rarely is. It's most likely a blend of 2, 3, or maybe even more different types of grasses. And what happens in a lot of these lawn mixes is they'll use some warm season grasses and some cool season grasses and blend them together. Well, what's the purpose? Well, the cool season grasses do much better in the cool seasons. So take Kentucky bluegrass, for example. Does much better in the cooler spring weather and late in the fall. Now, if your whole yard was bluegrass, you'd say, wow, I'm doing great, my yard looks awesome. And then for a few months in the heat of the summer, you'd say, no, this is a disaster. So you can see the importance of warm season and cool season grasses.
Well, it all depends on where you live too. So where we are in the United States, our ground is frozen for like 5 months out of the year, but then we also have a whole bunch of days in the middle of the summer that are upper 80s to low 90s, and that's where these warm season grasses really thrive. So in Darren's example here of Kentucky bluegrass, let's say you were just trying to grow an entire Kentucky bluegrass lawn. What ends up happening a lot of times is in the middle of the summer when that bluegrass is really struggling to do well, then crabgrass or some other warm season grass shows up that you didn't want out there. So then we usually have to talk about, okay, how can we get that under control? How can we get that out of there? But it seems to keep popping up every single year.
Well, it is a big thing for farmers too, because you look at fields and trying to keep the weeds out of their crops. Well, if you've got grass protection down with a soil residual herbicide, for example, oftentimes where we see those things break is when we get into the heat of the summer and those warm season grasses that germinated much later after that chemistry has worn out, now they come back into your field.
Well, it's not only that, but it's important for us as farmers to understand, well, what is that type of grass that's out there? Because a lot of the cool season grasses, we can control pretty easily with our pre-emerge herbicides. Even if we had an overabundance of pre-emerge herbicide, it just isn't that good on a lot of the warm season grasses like a crabgrass, for example.
Well, it is really important, whether you're growing a garden or raising a crop, to understand, does my crop or does my plant in my garden thrive when it's a little cooler, when it's a little warmer? What's the right timing for planting those things? And for farmers, for example, corn will get planted in our area. As Brian mentioned, we've got frozen ground. As soon as that ground thaws, we'll plant corn. But other farmers, even where it doesn't freeze, have to wait until things warm up to plant a crop like cotton, for example, that really doesn't like to be out there in the cold. So there are quite a few differences out there with plants that you need to understand.
Well, one of the differences you got to understand is how do you control our weed of the week and leave your crop still in good shape? We're going to talk about that later in the show.